The letter in Eliza's trembling hands was written in Thomas Hartwell's familiar handwriting, but the signature looked strange, too hasty, too desperate. When the dusty stagecoach pulled away from Dusty Hollow, leaving her alone with her worn bag, she noticed something else that made her blood run cold. 9 pairs of eyes staring at her from behind a dilapidated fence. The faces of people emaciated from hunger and hope. "You're not the one we were expecting," said the tallest of the children, a girl of about 16 with Thomas's piercing blue eyes. "But you'll do." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. After a year of correspondence with Thomas Hartwell, a successful rancher who had promised her a new life away from the stifling constraints of Boston society, she had expected to see her fiancé at the station. Instead, she saw a crowd of children ranging from toddlers to teenagers, all of whom bore the clear marks of poverty. "Where is Mr. Hartwell?" Eliza asked, barely able to keep her voice from trembling. The children looked at each other. The oldest stepped forward, her chin held high. "I'm Mary Hartwell. These are my brothers and sisters. Our father is gone." "Gone?" The word escaped Eliza's lips like a stone thrown into still water. "He disappeared 3 months ago," Mary continued, her voice as hard as winter ground. "Right after he lost the ranch to Cade Morrison in poker. Some say he ran away to avoid paying his debts. Others whisper that he may be dead." Eliza felt the ground slip away beneath her feet. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who might no longer exist, leaving behind her position as a governess and severing all ties with a family that disapproved of her choice. The children looked at her with hope and wariness, as if they had seen too many adults make promises they couldn't keep. "Letters," Eliza said weakly. "He wrote to me just a month ago." Mary's cheeks flushed. "It was me. I wrote those letters, miss. Papa never knew about you. I found your ad in an old newspaper and—" Her voice faltered. "We needed someone. The little ones are always hungry, and winter is coming." The deception should have outraged Eliza, but looking at these children, their patched clothes, their sunken cheeks, their eyes that held too much responsibility, she felt only deep, painful sympathy. In Mary's desperate step, she recognized her own longing for family, for belonging, for a place where she was needed. "Take me to your home," she said simply. The Hartwells' house stood on a dusty strip of land that had once been prosperous. The house sagged like an old man's shoulders, and there were holes in the barn roof through which the wind whistled. But the children kept the house clean, and Eliza saw traces of their efforts everywhere. Patched fences, a struggling vegetable garden, carefully mended and patched clothes hanging on a line. In the days that followed, Elisa threw herself into her work to support her family. She spent her savings on food, taught the older children to read and write properly, and gradually won their trust. The townspeople looked at her with sympathy and curiosity, a poor mail-order bride betrayed by the children of a gambler. But Eliza noticed things that escaped the attention of others. She noticed how food sometimes appeared on the doorstep when supplies were running low. She noticed that the horses were better fed than they should have been given their meager means. And most curious of all, she noticed a vagrant who sometimes lingered near their house, an elderly man in a low-brimmed hat who disappeared when she looked at him. One evening, as they sat by lamplight mending clothes, Mary finally couldn't take it anymore and told her the truth. "Daddy isn't dead," she whispered, glancing at the younger children sleeping in the next room. "He's hiding. He's pretending to be dead so that Cade Morrison won't come for him or us. Where is he? Somewhere out there. Watching. Watching." Mary's voice trailed off. "Watching to make sure I'm reliable," Eliza finished. Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. "At first, he wanted to send you away when he found out what I did. But then, he started watching you, watching how you take care of the babies, how you don't run away when things get tough. He said maybe maybe it wasn't such a bad idea after all. Eliza felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at the deception, relief that Thomas was alive, and a growing determination to make things right. "Tell me about Cade Morrison." Mary's face darkened. "He owns the saloon and half the businesses in town, but he wasn't always rich. He and Dad grew up together. They're brothers, although they no longer share the same last name. Cade took our mother's maiden name, Morrison, when he decided that Hartwell didn't suit his ambitions. It all fell into place. The poker game was rigged. Dad suspected Cade was cheating, but he couldn't prove it. In one night, he lost everything: the ranch, the cattle, even my mother's engagement ring." Mary clenched her hands into fists. "Cade said it was payment for old debts, but Dad didn't owe him anything except brotherly love." That night, Eliza lay awake, making plans. She had come to the West in search of a new life, and had perhaps found something better than she could have hoped for. Not only a husband, but a family that needed her, and an injustice that needed to be righted. The next morning, she put on her best dress, a dark blue silk gown she had saved for her wedding, and went into town. The Silver Dollar Saloon dominated the main street, its painted sign gleaming in the bright sunlight. Inside, she saw Cade Morrison sitting at a corner table surrounded by people. Despite his expensive clothes and carefully groomed mustache, he looked like a child. "Mr. Morrison," she said, approaching his table with the restraint instilled in her by her Boston upbringing. "I believe we need to talk about the Hartwell Ranch." Cade narrowed his eyes, studying her. Clearly not a local woman, educated, possibly dangerous, though he couldn't immediately determine in what way. "And you are?" "Eliza Hartwell," she said, pronouncing the name with a confidence she didn't quite possess. "Thomas's wife." The saloon fell silent. Cade leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Thomas Hartwell died several months ago, lady, and he never mentioned he had a wife." "Civil marriage," Eliza replied smoothly. "Perfectly legal in the eyes of God, and more importantly, in the eyes of territorial law. And that means I have certain rights to his property." It was a bluff, but she said it with such conviction that she saw the doubt in Cade's eyes. She took advantage of her advantage. "I've looked into the circumstances surrounding that poker game, Mr. Morrison. I wonder how many witnesses suddenly forgot convenient details, almost as if someone told them what to forget." Cade's face hardened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Hartwell." "No more dangerous than cheating your own brother out of his inheritance," she replied. "I wonder what the district judge would say about the evidence I've gathered. Marked cards have a tendency to turn up in the most interesting places." She was lying. She had no evidence, no marked cards, no case that would stand up in court. But in her years as a governess in Boston's elite families, she had learned one valuable thing: sometimes the threat of exposure is stronger than exposure itself. Cade looked at her for a long time, then laughed. "You have courage, lady. I'll give you that. But you're also out of your league." "Perhaps, but I'm not alone." She glanced toward the entrance to the parlor, where a familiar figure appeared: Thomas Hartwell, combed and dressed in his Sunday best, surrounded by several respected townspeople who had grown quietly weary of Cade's harsh methods. The meeting was awkward, filled with unspoken questions and cautious hope. Thomas explained his deception, how he needed to be sure she could be trusted with his children's lives, how he had fallen in love watching her care for them without any hope of reward. Eliza forgave him, understanding the desperation that drives parents to do the impossible. Together, they presented Cade with the evidence they had gathered, testimony from townspeople who had witnessed his deception, documents proving that the ranch had belonged to the Hartwell family for generations, and the most compelling evidence of all, the marked maps that Thomas had retrieved from Cade's private room above the saloon. Faced with exposure and the loss of his reputation, Cade agreed to return the ranch in exchange for their silence about his deception. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough. 6 months later, as Eliza stood in the doorway of their renovated home, watching Thomas teach the younger children to lasso cattle and Mary help her prepare dinner, she reflected on the strange turns life can take. She had come west in search of a husband, and instead found something far more valuable. A family formed not by blood or formal vows, but by choice, sacrifice, and love. The mail-order bride ad that started it all still lay in her jewelry box, a reminder that sometimes the most desperate adventures bring the greatest rewards. She had found her place in the world not in the salons of Boston, but in the dust and hopes of the American frontier, surrounded by people who needed her as much as she needed them. As the sun set over the restored Hartwell Ranch, painting the sky shades of gold and crimson, Eliza smiled and began setting the table for 10, for the family she had chosen and found, and which was finally complete. If you enjoyed this story about the Wild West, deception, family, and second chances, subscribe to hear more new stories that come to life on the American frontier. I'd love to hear your comments below. Where are you reading this book? And do you have any ancestors who lived during the Wild West era? Whether it's cowboys, pioneers, mail-order brides, or settler families, every story from this remarkable period of American history deserves to be remembered and cherished. Your family's frontier heritage could inspire the next story.